Hey folks, David here with Roll the Dice Games, and today I'm super excited to be on YouTube starting this new series because I made a tabletop RPG. This is Tomb Runners. This is my game. This is a hardcover booklet. You can see this is the very early proof. You can see the cover is not quite centered here, and there's the not for resale sticker that's printed on here directly. But this is a physical real book that exists, and I'm super excited to tell you about it. But first, I think it would be best to start with the games that inspired it, and that'll probably give you a better idea of what my game is and what it's about. So the short elevator pitch is, what if you took Blades in the Dark and Shadow Dark and smashed them together? Now, if you're familiar with these games, then that probably tells you a lot. But if not, let me give you a quick rundown. So Shadow Dark is the indie darling OSR, old school modernized game. That's the pitch, I believe. And to me, it's not as much modernized as it is old school role playing simplified. And I mean that in a complimentary way. And in a lot of ways, simplified is very modern compared to the old school gaming. But this game takes the dungeon crawl playing and distills it into its purest form. It cuts out a lot of the fluff and just lets you get straight to the fun. And I love it for that. And Blades in the Dark is also an indie darling of the past maybe 10 years. And this game spawned from a revolutionary system called Powered by the Apocalypse. And Apocalypse World was the original game there. And this became its own system called Forged in the Dark. And this is a very modern narrative heavy game. And when I say narrative heavy, I mean the dice mechanics, the gameplay mechanics, the rules, and the character sheets in every aspect of the book reinforces narrative play. And to me, the main difference in this game and this game is that the dice rolls are non-binary. And that's what encourages the more narrative heavy play. What I mean by that is old school role-playing games and traditional, especially the traditional fantasy games, you would roll a D20 or maybe a D100 system, and you would pass or fail. That's it. And then the next person would go, the next NPC would go, or the GM would say, okay, well, here's what happens next. But modern narrative-heavy games often use a non-binary mechanic. So in Blades in the Dark, that's done with a pool of D6, and you roll X D6 and take the highest single result. And the higher the number, the better the success level. So there's failure or success with a cost, or success, or maybe critical success even. But that key difference there creates a natural flow to the game for the players and the GM, where you try to do something and you succeed, but there's a consequence for succeeding. You hit an enemy, the enemy hits back. That's a very basic idea of success with a cost. So what I did was I really wanted to keep the traditional D20 feel and play, but I wanted to have a new narrative approach to a D20 system. So I made what I call the narrative D20 system. It's very simple. You roll a D20, and instead of rolling against a set DC with a pass or fail, there is a table of scaling success levels. And it's very simple. There's basically 3 levels. You have failure, you have success with a consequence, and you have success. Of course, you could still add in critical success or critical failure if you roll a natural 1 or a natural 20. But the basic pitch is those 3 tiers of success, and that governs all rolls in Tomb Runners. So what's that look like in play? So let's say there's a goblin on a ledge, and the warrior wants to swing at the goblin, charge in, swing at the goblin, and try to knock him down off the ledge at the same time. So if he rolls a very low roll, or let's start with high, he rolls a success or critical success. He hits the goblin. If he rolls a critical, maybe he disarms him and knocks him down. If he rolls a success with a consequence, maybe he hits the goblin pretty solidly, but the goblin grazes him with his dagger back and hits him in the arm as he's slashing down at him. So he takes damage in return. Let's say he rolls a full failure. Then maybe he misses, and in response, the goblin jumps on his back and starts trying to stab him with his dagger through his armor. That's an example of success with a consequence and non-binary outcomes with a D20 roll. That's the narrative D20 system in a nutshell. Now, this game also borrows from Blades in the Dark by using the idea of characters having stress. So stress in Tomb Runners is the resource that lets you do cool stuff. You have HP, which is your health and your physical well-being. If you lose all your HP, you go down. And I'll explain my favorite rule in Tomb Runners is the characters going down rule. I'll get to that in a little bit. But you have HP and you have SP, which is stress points. Stress points is how you do cool stuff. Spellcasters spend SP to cast a spell. It costs 1 SP per spell level. Very simple. But other characters and spellcasters can use stress to do other cool stuff too. Every time you roll a d20, if you don't like the outcome, you can push the roll by spending stress to add a d6 to it. And you roll the d6, add the result, and hopefully bump up that successful level. So, let's say the warrior rolled a failure. He rolled an 8, but he knows if he pushes that up to a 9 or higher, then it's not a failure anymore. And instead of the goblin being on his back, he just takes a simple hit from the goblin's dagger. So he spends his SP, rolls the d6, and adds it to his d20. Or maybe he rolled a success with a consequence and wants to try to get it to a full success and not have any consequence. But let's say that roll still was bad and there's still a consequence. The next thing you can do with stress is resist. Anytime there's a consequence, like say the goblin jumping on the warrior's back to stab him in the neck with his dagger, you can spend stress to do a resist roll, which works exactly the same as an action roll. You roll the d20 and there's the 3 tiers of success. And depending on how well you roll, you either resist the consequence fully. Maybe the warrior grabs the goblin and slings him off his back before he can strike him. Or you get a partial resistance. The goblin gets maybe 1 or 2 hits in before you shake him off. So you take maybe half damage. Or you fail and you still take the consequence. So players have a lot of power narratively and mechanically to reinforce their narrative choices in this game. So the way that plays out for the GM is the monsters don't have turns. The players act and then the GM responds to how the players act. So when there's a consequence, that means something bad happens. If there's not a consequence, then the scene continues without a bad thing happening to the players. But because the players have so much power narratively and mechanically, especially with resisting bad things, the GM can be really aggressive. Once players realize that power level, then the GM can be really aggressive by putting them in more risky and dangerous situations with each progressing scene, or even throughout one scene. Let's go over a couple more games that inspired this. Monster of the Week. This is my personal favorite Powered by the Apocalypse game, and I love this game because it creates adventures that, to me, this game is like, it creates a singular threat. It's really good at creating one monster that the party is up against and making that one monster scary. Because a big part of Tomb Runners is not crawling through mega dungeons. You can do that, but I really wanted Tomb Runners, and the reason it's called tombs and not dungeons, I really wanted to push the idea of maybe going into a tomb is one big room, one singular encounter. That's one really cool boss fight, or maybe, a summoner with some skeleton army men that you get to have a multi-phase fight with. And it's really pushing the idea, inspired by Monster of the Week, of having maybe one big threat instead of a gauntlet of threats. Tunnels and Trolls. This is another classic game, and this does a lot of really interesting things with combat. This is the 7.5 edition. And one of the things Tunnels and Trolls did that was really interesting was it had all your rolls happen at once. So that sounds really weird to old school dungeon crawling fantasy RPG play, but it's really exciting in practice because it lets you tell a story by resolving all the action at once. So similar in Tomb Runners, players can all decide what they're going to do and roll, and then you can resolve the rolls all at once. And that's really fun for the GM because you can say, okay, this person succeeded, this person has a cost. Okay, how's that looking in practice? So The players can decide what order their effects will happen, and if there's a disagreement, they can come to a consensus on that, or you can decide it for them. But say the warrior was successful in attacking the goblin, but the wizard was casting a fireball, hurling a ball of fire at the other goblin, but he rolled a success with a consequence. So in response, I'm going to say, okay, you hit that goblin, but you also hit the tapestry behind him, and now the room is on fire, and the warrior is standing right beside that fire. So what do you do next? So that's like a very, simple example of both players acted at the same time. One of them succeeded, one of them didn't quite fully succeed, and here's what happens next. It creates a really natural flow between the players and the GM, and it doesn't have the back and forth rolls where nothing happens. To me, that's my least favorite part of old school dungeon crawling is I roll against the static AC, I missed. Okay, now the monster rolls against me, it misses. So we go back and forth and nothing is happening. The story, the scene, the action is not advancing at all. In Tomb Runners, every roll will advance the action. And that is the design of this game. Another game that had a lot of impact in the design and the inspiration for me is Dungeon Crawl Classics. And if you don't know the other games, you probably know this one. If you're not just a modern RPG player, or I should say modern fantasy RPG player that plays only 5e or something. You've probably heard of Dungeon Crawl Classics. And what I love about this one is the scaling success for the spell rolls. A spell in this game, if you haven't seen it, it's quite a thing to behold. So this is a single spell. This whole page, and this is a full-size book, this is a single spell table result. So depending on how you roll from a 1 to a 32 or higher, because Dungeon Crawl Classics features, let's see, all the way up to a D30 die, and it has a die chain system where the better you are at something, the higher tier die you roll. The better you roll, the cooler the effect is for the spell. And these are all prescriptive written out effects. So for like the giant growth spell, if you roll poorly, you might make something a little bit bigger. But if you roll astronomically high, you could cause a world-shattering event of making something as big as a mountain, or making your entire party the size of giants for X amount of hours. That is a really fun mechanic, and what is otherwise a pretty traditional experience for dungeon crawl fantasy. This is like kind of wacky, psychedelic dungeon crawl fantasy, if you're not familiar. Another thing that this game inspired in Tomb Runners, the Mighty Deed die for the fighter class, basically. They have an extra die they can add on to their attack rolls to do something cool. So it could be like, throw sand in the face of the opponent to blind them while they're fighting in melee, or something like that. And you roll an additional die, and if you roll well enough, then the outcome also has a scaling tier depending on the results. So I really wanted to take that idea of every character can do cool stuff. It's narrative. You're telling the table what you're doing. You're not just saying, I swing my sword at the goblin. You're telling the table how that happens and what that looks like in practice. And it doesn't have to be super descriptive. You don't have to use a lot of flavorful language. You just explain, what do you want to do? Do you want to stab the goblin through and pierce him to the wall? Or do you want to, chop off his arm so he doesn't have that dagger, or he can't throw that firebomb? It's very natural language, but descriptive. That's the goal. A little bit more about me. So I previously made the Dungeon Masters deck on Kickstarter, and this was a 100 card deck of Oracle tables, traditional D20 tables, for every element a Dungeon Master might need to plan out a campaign or run a session. So it could be, this is the character deck, so you have your race, your background, your character flaws, your desires, your fears, NPC generators for CD characters or characters in the wild, or magic characters, holy characters, nobles, stuff like that. There's a dungeon category that creates like the setting, the theme, the rooms, the treasures, traps, trap triggers, inhabitants and their goals, stuff like that. And then the bottom of every card has a modifier table, and the top of the cards have story cube style icons that give you a visual tool for inspiration. So this was a 100 card deck, and I am currently working on the second edition that will match thematically to Tomb Runners. And I'm planning on launching that alongside Tomb Runners. So you'll be able to get the deck or the game with the book with all the game rules, all the character creation stuff, and then you'll get the deck, and that can give you endless generation tools to create your adventures. Tomb Runners is by design a very simple system. It is less than 1,000 words for the core rules. That is all gameplay rules. And to prove that, this is A5 pages. This is a double page spread. But imagine, the booklet, as I showed you, is one of these. And the core rules fit on, so that's 2 pages. That's the action rolls and resist rolls. Dice mechanics for advantage, pushing, resist, assisting, stuff like that. That's 1 more page, 3, and a page of art. Then the stats, the core stats, which are 4 stats. You have brawn, agility, mind, and spirit. And every time you do an action, you'll pick which one of those you're using and describe how. So if you're getting attacked by a minotaur with an axe, you could use agility to dodge out of the way, or you could use brawn to try to hold your shield up and block it. That kind of idea. If you're casting a spell, you use mind. If you're casting a holy spell, you use spirit. Very simple. And character creation is also very simple. You get an advantage in one of those stats and a disadvantage in another, and the other 2 are natural rolls of just 1d20. So there's always something you're really good at and something you're not as good at, and then the other things you're okay at. So that's 5 pages so far, and then 6, 7. That is all of the core rules. This page here covers things like conditions, how conditions work, which is very simple, inspired by Shadow Dark. Conditions can grant advantage or disadvantage or just prevent you from acting. Very straightforward. Conditions like poison, you just use a clock to count down, time till death or damage every X amount of hours or days, whatever. There's a reputation system, 1 to 5, from hostile to ally. Very simple. And then downtime rules, which is part of the core loop of the game. You adventure, and then you have downtime. And that is also inspired by Blades in the Dark. So that really gets you to the action and then has codified rules and mechanics for the downtime phase. And downtime is when you'll do things like heal up. You'll spend your supply to level up or to buy new items or craft new items. Or you can travel, you can journey during downtime and spend your supply. Supply is an abstraction of wealth and resources in this game. So if a ranger is firing a lot of arrows, they might spend supply. There's no set amount of arrows and there's no set amount of gold. There's just an abstraction of supply. Character creation. This is a classless system, or a build your own class system, more apt. So you create your character by choosing a heritage, which is a stand-in for race or species. So you can describe your character however you like. You could say, I'm a gnome, but you choose a heritage that explains a little bit about your people. So the heritages are hardy. You get a couple extra hit points. Venerable, you get a couple extra stress. Lucky, you get an extra luck point to spend at downtime. And luck is just a simple spend a token to reroll any 1 die. Very simple. Very powerful. So having the lucky feat or heritage, you have double the opportunities to reroll bad rolls. And the last one is adaptable, where you get an extra feat at character creation. And feats are the real meat of the character creation, the class system in this game. So there are currently 3 pages of feats. It's about 30 total. And these cover all of your archetypical abilities. So spellcasting is a feat. And when you choose spellcasting, you choose what school of magic you have. Arcane, you have necromancy, holy, nature, etc. I think illusion. what was my other one? I'm missing one. Elemental. I'm sorry. Illusion falls under arcane. You have arcane, elemental, necromancy, holy, and nature. So you choose spellcasting as a feat. For things like melee combat, you have relentless, where you can spend stress to heal. Or you have, one of my favorites is heroic, where you spend stress to just perform a feat of strength without rolling. You just automatically succeed. And you can do that once per downtime. It recharges with downtime. So feats are all mechanical, cool things you can do. So you could build a barbarian and take a druid-inspired feat of bark skin, where you naturally reduce all damage by a set amount. So you're a ruthless barbarian with your two-handed axe. You choose the fighter feat, which lets you get a free push on attacks with your favorite weapon, and you choose bark skin so that you are just naturally resistant and tough even without wearing armor. And then you choose reckless, where you can automatically succeed with a consequence on an attack. So you don't care if you get hurt, you just want to make sure you hurt the other in return or first. So that's like a very simple build. There's things in here for holy magic and paladin inspired or thievery and roguish feats. So you can really make your own character how you like. And with normal character creation, you have 3 feats at the start, which is more than enough when combined with your heritage to really build out an archetype even from level 1. Now, level 1 play, low level play, is very dangerous, and that is core. That's a core tenet of OSR, dungeon crawl, old school fantasy roleplay. And so you have 7 health, which in this game, all harm is D6 based. So a level 1 monster does 1d6, a level 2 monster does 2d6. Same with weapons. Weapons also scale off of d6. And this is all inspired by the much beloved kind of cult classic West End Star Wars d6 system, where everything in this game, from a lowly cheap blaster to a Death Star, does XD6. It's got a really smart scaling system. I took that idea and just simplified it to a tier system where everything is a tier 1 to tier 10. Tier 1 sources, weapons, monsters, etc. do 1d6 spells. Spells do d6 damage. Or tier 10, say an ancient dragon or a tier 10 spell does 10d6 damage. That gives a very natural, predictable bell curve for the general output of damage to any characters, but it still leaves room for excitement, because even a tier 2 monster, it might roll, it rolls 2d6, it might do 2 damage or 12 damage. There's a world of difference there, but on average, it's going to do about 7 damage. So it gives a natural predictability to output. So it lets you balance combat very easily by just keeping the tier of monsters about equal to the levels of the players. I think that's about it for right now. I'm going to show a lot more of the book and the design as we move forward here. This is just I want to get started here, give a big overview pitch of the game, and talk a little bit about the games that inspired it. As you can maybe see a little bit, I have a shelf here full of other games. Some others that I love: Masks, another Powered by the Apocalypse game, Iron Sworn, and Starforged, very influential on my design approach. One from Free League that I really love. This is a campaign setting for Forbidden Lands. Forbidden Lands is a great system. It uses the Year Zero system, and it does a really unique approach to fantasy roleplay with a lot of overland travel emphasis in a really interesting setting of nature versus corruption and things like that. And I really love the flavor of this game. The Year Zero system is really cool, but I really love the flavor and the theme that Forbidden Lands generates and gives you. What else do I have on the table here? This is a little peek at the character sheet. This is a 5x7 note card, but the goal in the end is to have the character sheets fit on a regular index card. So you have 4 per page or 2 per page on the booklet. And that's, as you can probably see here, I'm not sure, It's just your core stats, your HP, your SP, your luck, your supply, the 4 stats, your attributes, which one you get a advantage on and which one you get a disadvantage on, and then your heritage, your job, and your feats. And then at the bottom here, you have 5 item slots and 5 consumable slots. And things held in your arms do count towards that. Armor doesn't count towards it because you're wearing it, but everything else counts towards it. 2-handed weapons take 2 slots. So you only have 3 slots to get your treasure and get back to town and sell it. And that is the main way you advance in this game. So supply, downtime, inventory space, there's all a natural tension there to advancement versus, let's say, character comfort. Because you might want to sell all your loot and spend it on advancement, which is training, downtime. That's how you level up. But you might need to heal up because healing also costs supply and downtime. It takes time during downtime. So there's a natural trade-off and a kind of risk versus reward to the natural flow of the game, the downtime versus the adventuring and the cycle that creates. So I've probably said way too much for a first video here. I'm rambling a little bit and my throat is burning. So let me get stopped here. I'll check back in soon. I'm going to show you probably on the computer some of the design, some of the great art. This cover was done by one of my favorite artists in the scene right now, Bruno Prosecco. He is also the artist behind the current, Knock issue 5, I want to say, that is on crowdfunding. And he does just the coolest work. I gave him just a written out pitch, a concept, and he absolutely nailed it. I gave him the most minor of ever change requests, and he immediately knew exactly what I wanted changed, and it's perfect. I love this art. The back art is an artist I found on Reddit. I cannot think of his real name right now, but I will find it and put it in the description because he also did this killer piece that I love that really captures the tone of what I want Tomb Runners to be. So I just wanted to give a quick shout out to them. All of the art that I've got in this book has been from people online, and I really love it. I do have some real life friends that I am commissioning for some pieces that I'm really excited about. I have my take on a gelatinous cube idea that I'm waiting to see brought to life, and I think that might end up being we might do a special edition hardcover in like a glossy, shiny print, like Shadow Dark. Shadow Dark has the kind of glossy, light-catching, luminous print there. And I was thinking the core game is definitely going to keep this art because it captures the flavor of the game so much. You can't see it here closely, but this is a knight with a flaming sword in a cave. But behind him, there's a pack of goblin eyes peeking out of the darkness. And his face does not look heroic, but he looks pretty scared. The concept was give him a Scooby-Doo face where he knows he's in danger. And this art is perfect. I love it. But I might have my friend's piece of the gelatinous cube idea be a special edition piece or a poster or a card back or something for the DM's deck. So excited to show that as well. Really, honestly, half of the reason I wanted to do my own book was to fill it with art that I love. And so far, I'm over the moon, obviously, with the art that I've had done for this. And I want to put a lot more money into the art that goes into this book and into the pockets of the artists that give us such great work. Because to me, the rules obviously are the main thing that are important in the game. But the presentation and the art is what really brings it to life for players. I'm a firm believer of that. I'm going to make PDFs available. Obviously, it's the digital age. A lot of people play online. There will be PDFs available, but I am a firm believer in the printed product and having something physical and tangible in your hands, which is why I already have this printed hard copy proof to hold, to look at. I use it as a notebook. I have blank pages in here with just some scrap art that I'm using to make notes, to use this as a working notebook. So I'm touching it every day and having it in my hands. I think that's it. I think that's all. I've said so much here. I don't even remember what all I didn't cover. So I will make another video shortly. I'm going to take you along the process of this. It's going to be crowdfunded over the summer, I believe. I don't have an exact date yet, but I do want to get all of this in motion before things get any more crazy economy wise with this messed up situation we're in. I am very fortunate. Both my decks are printed here in Orlando, Florida by Shuffled Ink. These are all local. And this book is made in Columbia, South Carolina, which is where I went to college. And I didn't know that until I got it in my hand. I didn't know that's where it was coming from. So that was cool. I knew it was in the US, but I didn't know where the print lab was exactly. So I should be relatively protected from the crazy tariff stuff, but the broader economy questions, of course, everything is tumultuous right now. So I do want to get this rolling sooner rather than later. So thank you for joining me. I hope you like what I have here. I'll have some like a sample core rules up online for you soon to look at. But honestly, I think just telling you about the core mechanic there gives you enough to understand what we're going for. And if you got this far, then I think you're going to enjoy what I'm making here and what we're going to have for you. So thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon.